I have a friend named Dan Bushell. We're really not friends. We're Facebook friends. Dan and I have run in similar circles in the past, and he actually has a blog page called The Confessions of a Former Pastor. And I was kind of borrowing from that and made a confession that I don't believe much anymore. I find beliefs way too relative for my own comfort. As a matter of fact, the journey's been long for me, and one of the journeys happened to be in the Sermon on the Mount because I was in graduate school up in Denver. I went to Denver Seminary, was taking some classes, and one of the classes I took was the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the textbooks was written by one of the professors there. And it was actually a master's thesis he had written, and then he kind of cleaned it up and turned it into a book. And it was 72 different interpretations of the Sermon on the Mount. 72 different interpretations of the Sermon on the Mount. And as you read through the book, you read, interpretation number 1. You say, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. Until you get to the next chapter and read interpretation number 2. Oh, this makes as much sense as the last one did, but it's not the same. And then the third interpretation, and then the fourth, and the fifth. And at the end, what you've got are 72 interpretations just floating around in there. Some of them don't look anything alike, but all of them make sense on some level. And that is the arrogance of who we are. I don't trust anybody, including me, and especially you, if you say, well, this is the way it is. No, that's the way you see it. And I respect you for seeing it that way. I don't respect you if you're going to try to force me to see it your way. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the interpretation that I have adopted for the Sermon on the Mount is the simple interpretation. And that is that Jesus wasn't presenting this as some futuristic constitution or code of ethic for the kingdom when it finally got here. That was one interpretation. And quite frankly, whether we want to own it or not, most of us hope that's what it is, that it really doesn't apply to today. But see, I don't think Jesus minced his words. I think if Jesus said something, he meant it for now. So if he says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also, which I think Brunette Aldor needed to hear, and Batista needed to hear, and clearly neither one of them are Christian. Right? What Jesus asks us to do and what we do are generally not always in the same ballpark. If someone wants to sue you to take your shirt, just give them your coat. If anyone forces you to go a mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, I think Jesus meant that. I don't think that it was, again, for some futuristic view, or it only applies to Christians. I think it is something that God has called us to do. The law was designed from the very beginning not to expand out to the furthest reaches of human limits, but rather to confine us to the worst of us. When we first started New Heritage, we came up with, at least in my mind, the sort of the perfect illustration of what the kingdom business is about and what church's role is in the kingdom. And I had just watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, thank you, First Kind, whatever it was, Richard Dreyfuss. And all I could see was Devil's Tower, and him carving it out of mashed potatoes. And I thought, If the kingdom of God is the top of Devil's Tower, then what is the church's role? The law's role is to find the safest, closest center of that territory and build a fence and say, don't step outside this fence. That way you'll be safe. But the kingdom of God is roughly the whole area. And at best, the church, as Jesus envisioned it, is to provide a group of people to sort of ride the range around the perimeter and just warn people if they get too close. You could fall off. Too many churches try to build a fence and say, don't step out of this circle. If you do, you're going to go to hell. The law said, tit for tat. If someone hurts you, you do this. But he said, what I want to say to you is, A, don't be so arrogant to believe that you are the law, that you can take the law into your own hands. And so Terry outlined for us several weeks ago some choices. And the first thing he talked about is to turn down the temperature. Okay? To cool down. We're going to skip that for now. I'd like for us to discuss that at the end because I think that's where it begins. But I'd like to start with the other one. The other were, I guess we're not getting the transitions. Okay. His three choices that he gave us was first to choose, he said, choose to lose. If a person wants to sue you for your shirt, give him your outside coat as well. Choose to go ahead and lose that. Choose not to retaliate. The second choice he gave us was to choose to serve. If someone wants you to go a mile, go 2. Illustrating what the Roman government was allowed to do, and that was any soldier could compel you to carry their equipment for 1 mile. So when you get to the end of that mile, just say, hey, I'll take it a little further for you. Take a servant heart attitude. Choose to give. Choose to be a giving person. But is that always what we need to do? Are there any circumstances, and this is where we actually open up for discussion, are there any circumstances where we choose not to lose? Where Christ would choose not to lose? Is there any situation where Christ would choose not to retaliate? See, I believe there are. I believe there are situations where Jesus would step in and say, no, ain't going to happen. Where might that be?
Money changers in the temple.
Ooh. Where somebody is doing something that clearly is impacting truth. Lydia? Oh. So what we're saying is, let's back up a minute. Do we expect the government to turn the other cheek? If we follow Jesus' argument to the furthest conclusion, and quite frankly, I do have Christian friends that believe this, and I will say a little more about that in a minute without being judgmental, then we could argue that World War II, our involvement in World War II, our love learned to be better. Those of you that know me know that I do not believe faith exists because we've got answers. I believe faith exists because we don't have answers. If the church if Terry Cagle, if Terry Cartwright, if Shepherds, if Rick Warren, or I won't even say that. If Jeffers, I'll say it, God forbid, provide answers for us, then where is the faith? The faith is in the person, not in God. We have to get to the point in our lives where we say, I don't know the answer to this question. I trust God does. And at the end of the day, I trust that if I got the answers wrong, God's going to either A, reveal it to me, or let me die and say, let me explain this to you, son. I don't cease being his child just because I don't know all the answers any more than Philip ceases to be my son because he hasn't had the experience I have, or Bennett, my grandson, because he doesn't have the answers I have. They're still my children. And I'm still the son of W.T. Cartwright, even though I don't know that I'll ever have the wisdom that he had. Doesn't keep me from being a child of God just because I don't have the right answers. And I don't have the right answers to this, but I don't believe that God said that we always, in every circumstance, turn the other cheek. There is a difference, and where I struggle in my own faith is the difference between what I do personally as an individual and what we do collectively as a body of people. Either that or we have to basically throw Paul away. Because Paul says in Romans, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Something to keep in mind, folks, in the coming election. I'm going to ask God why those are the only choices we've got. Because I'm not real comfortable with it right now. Or at least the way it's panning out. There's a couple of choices I would like to have, but they're not apparently going to be there. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against God, what God has instituted. That passage right there alone is why David Lipscomb said true Christians don't even get involved in civil government. What difference does it make if God's in charge? And this was written to a group of people. This happened to be written when Nero was emperor of Rome. The lovely Nero. The gracious Nero, everybody's friend. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. This is what I really wanted to focus on. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not fear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on a wrongdoer. So, is it the government's job to turn the other cheek? If it is a child that's about to fall victim to a pedophile, I think I've got a responsibility to stop them. I'm not going to turn the other cheek on that deal. It's one thing when it is me. It's another thing when it's innocence. If we follow this as a guide, then no Christian ought to ever be involved in empire business, meaning no Christian ought to be in the military or a police officer. And there are some people that will argue that is the case. And I'm not going to make that judgment for people. It is not an easy question to answer. Therein lies faith. Do we take Jesus' words as the absolute because he is the absolute authority? I would tend that way, but I'm not sure in those moments, speaking to those people, he was speaking to every situation, but those which applied to you as a person, as a human being. If somebody comes to take something, to rob you, just give it to them. Don't resist evil with anger. On the other hand, if somebody breaks in my home and wants to hurt my grandchildren or rape my wife, guess what? I'm not going to turn the other cheek. I'm sorry. It won't happen. You rape me, but not somebody I've been given responsibility for. And if I'm wrong, God forgive me. That's where my faith comes in. It is the struggle called faith. I don't even know why we're going down that road, because most of us have a hard time just not even screaming at people who cut us off in traffic, much less resisting other evil, calling people racka and fool and stupid and idiot pretty much on a consistent basis every time I go to work in the morning. Sir. Right.
And that goes back to the whole idea, was it peacekeeper or peacemaker?
Ah. What's the difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker? One's a gun and one's a person. Those who train in and teach and discuss emotional intelligence say, if we do not find ways to curb our emotion, especially in anger, we are bound to keep doing what we've always done. We cannot, and quite frankly, I don't think media helps us. As a matter of fact, I don't think culture in general helps us. I have learned that my disposition in life is a whole lot better if I don't listen to any kind of talk radio, sports or otherwise. Because who usually calls into those shows? Angry people, crazy people. So whether you're talking politics or you're talking sports or you're talking local stuff, just nutty people call in and they just vent their venom. And quite frankly, I've got friends, I used to have friends on Facebook that did that. And you can block from seeing the comments of certain people, which I've done quite frequently. And I've got people that are still my friends that I don't read anything they post because I just don't enjoy what they post. And they ruin my day. How do we bring the temperature down? How do we cool our jets and learn to turn the other cheek on a personal level? We'll never solve the debate of how far to extend turning the other cheek when other people are involved and we are put in charge of other people. We're not going to, it's been going on for 2,000 years and we're not going to end that debate this morning. But what we can do is talk about me personally. Lydia? Prayer and meditation. Because the psalmist says that we can't really be in the kingdom. We can't own the kingdom until we meditate on the kingdom, until we think about the things God's called us to do. And the one that's most at peace with it is the one that meditates on it day and night. That really does focus on that. We got a whole generation of people that everything is about what I'm feeling right now, and they cannot not act on it, and they wonder why they can't keep a job. or why they're always in trouble with their managers or their coworkers, because we've got a whole generation that hasn't self-regulated, and there's nothing out there modeling it, at least on a regular basis, that says, slow down, take a deep breath, think alternatively to that. I love being where I am at the university because we have a bunch of brain scientists around. I've said for years, unless you have dementia or, Alzheimer's, that your forgetfulness as you get older is just like your hard drive on your computer. It has nothing to do with being forgetful. It is that the file's gotten too big. It slows the computer down. And UT Dallas has got the research that says that's absolutely true. The longer we are around and the more information we're exposed to, the longer it takes to go through the file system to find it. It's in there. Do what? I said hallelujah. Of course. And think about how much information we get bombarded with every day as compared to our grandparents. I mean, yeah. But what's really interesting in all, the other thing that we've discovered is, right at the top of our brainstem is our amygdala. And that's what shoots goofy juice into our head. So that whenever we feel a threat, it starts pumping that juice in there, usually adrenaline. And if you watch yourself, folks, it's really, so for you right dominant people, as soon as you feel a threat, you go like this. Did you see that? You go. If you're on the phone talking to somebody and you're getting heated, you go like that. It's this twitch in us because the goofy juice is going. And we automatically do that. Now, if you're right dominant, if you're left dominant, you do that. What are you doing? I cannot stand here in good conscience and say, turn the other cheek if we don't deal with the how. And when that goofy juice is going, we do this because in the old days, when the saber-toothed tiger came upon us, we did this. And we still do that, except we've gotten a little more tame to do it this way on the phone. When we're dealing with Frontier, we do that because it is a slightly more evolutionized view of this. So when I do this, what am I doing? I'm doing one of two things. I'm really getting ready to punch you, or I'm getting ready to run away. It's interesting, though, that some of us in culture have developed gray matter. And that's what surrounds that part of our brain. And it takes about 6 seconds from the time we do this for us to decide, is it worth it? How long does it take a human being to count internally to 10? About 6 seconds. So Mama was right. Then I can start making decisions. But people that are in emotional intelligence says, if we don't, what we do as a culture is we rehearse reactionary things all the time. And a lot of the rehearsals that we're doing are negative. Like if I had a gun. I'm sorry? That's right. To react, it takes 6 seconds to decide. Well, we either let the goofy juice take over, or we allow logic to take over. It takes 6 seconds for us to come to a logical conclusion. And I was in a debate 25 years ago. What's wrong with situational ethics, folks? There's nothing wrong with situational ethics. Every situation is unique. I have to work through it, but I also have to rehearse through it. If the only rehearsal I get over and over again on ESPN is Batista jumping up and Rubnet Odor cold cocking him, and that's all I see, then I think that's my option. No, that's not my option. My option is to say, if I was confronted with that situation, how would I respond to it? We have to do that with emotional intelligence all the time. And in the class I teach at the university, I say, one of the best exercises you can do if you're married? Is to sit down and plan your spouse's funeral in your brain. Because the reality is, unless you die in a plane crash or a car accident together, one day one of you is going to be alone. How are you going to deal with that? Emotionally intelligent people deal with it instead of waiting till the day happens. If your boss calls you in to chew you out, how are you going to do it? You have to rehearse that, how you're going to respond to it. And you rehearse what you think Jesus would have you do. Because if you don't, the goofy juice is going to take over. And you're going to do the exact thing you don't want to do. That's why we meditate on Scripture day and night. That's why we hear Jesus say, turn the other cheek. What circumstances do I turn the other cheek, and what would that look like, right, for me? Sometimes flight is the best choice. I would rather them say, man, look how fast he can run, is a whole lot better than, wow, he sure looks natural. See, I don't see how we are not a people, quite frankly, I don't think most evangelical Christians, I don't think most people in the Christian realm have been trained to be meditative. And all meditative to me means is you look at scenarios from life and say, how would God ask me to respond to this? And you rehearse those in your head. Given this opportunity, what would I do? Given the opportunity to turn the other cheek, given the opportunity, we didn't even get to, it's easy to talk about violence. One place where if I'm in a divorce situation, a little too late for me in that situation, but if I were in a divorce situation and I knew that my spouse was abusive, but they had the money and the wherewithal to sue me and to take custody of my children, I don't give them my children in my coat too. I fight that sucker because I believe Jesus would fight that. If it's just about, my nephew went through a divorce, a nasty divorce. Good news, no children. But he gave her everything. He said, I'm young enough, I can start over. Unfortunately, she wasn't willing to take everything he had. She wanted more. And he called me and he said, Uncle Terry, what do I do? And I says, I think what you were doing he brought some money to it. She wanted that too. And I said, what you're doing in that situation, he said, Jesus says I should give her my coat. And I said, you've already given her everything. I said, it sounds like to me what you might be doing is enabling a person to continue to be abusive. I said, you got to stop it. Somebody's got to stop it. I think the parting word would be imagine yourself in situations where you're asked to do something against your will and how you respond, rehearsing that. That it gets back to the old, what would Jesus do? It's easy to say that in the midst of the circumstance. Meditation would demand that I do it before I'm ever faced with the situation. How would Jesus ask me to respond in any, if Deanne chooses to sue me or somebody chooses to sue me, what should my response be? If someone chooses to get angry and lash out at me, what should my response be? Unless I played that scenario in my mind, I probably will never be able to do it. Another trick or another exercise to do is always to see things from that other person's perspective. That's the biggest help to me when people cut me off in traffic. They did not wake up that morning saying, we hear Cartwright is going to go down Independence at about 7:15, so we're going to try to stop him from getting to work on time. They're doing other things because, God knows I've never cut anybody off in traffic because I was preoccupied. So trying to remember that other people have things going on too is one of the things I rehearse quite often. And I just imagine they're in a hurry because they've got an emergency. And if I can remember, they may have somebody at a hospital who's about to breathe their last and they're trying to get there. If I just remember that, then I can tolerate the jerks.
I'm finding myself at a loss for words. And the funny thing is, it's okay.